Well, fantastic. I haven't done one of these in a while, so I hope I'm not rusty, but I'm very excited for today's conversation. Thanks for everyone tuning in for this conversation on Web3 mass adoption. We have three great panelists joining myself, Frank Chaparro, Director of Special Projects here at The Block. And I'd like to thank first and foremost the presenter of this event, Fireblocks, and SERGIO SILVA, who's joining us from their team, as well as Zed Yin, the co-founder of Magic Eden, and Scott Siegel of Helium Foundation. So you're probably thinking, wow, those are some really interesting firms operating in different segments of our industry, but they provide really interesting, and well, they're going to provide, I can assure you, some really valuable insights about Web3 adoption. I think to sort of set the foundation or the scene here, right? When we think about where we are as an industry, I think a lot of people would agree that we're kind of in this transition phase from what is a speculative, what once was a very over-levered market, to one that is actually seeing people use the technology and the underpinning networks and blockchains that we've speculated over. So let's sort of start there. We have some, we can basically start with SERGIO. Maybe you can give us some color. The clients that you're dealing with are engaging with you to build out these Web3 use cases. Looking back over the last year or so, are those projects or those developments still underway? Have they slowed down or have they sped up?
Sure. Thanks, by the way, for having us. I'm excited to represent Fireblocks today. Just a background for the audience, I lead Web3 BD here at Fireblocks. I've been with the company for almost 3 years, spending 12 years on Wall Street, before falling in love with JPEGs and then really moving into the Web3 world. And yes, so Fireblocks, we're the leading provider of digital asset infrastructure, self-custody technology for big enterprises. So everything from exchanges, hedge funds, really anybody that needs a wallet at the corporate level. That's the core of our offering, and that's one of our three pillars. The other two pillars are wallet as a service, as well as smart contract management or tokenization. And so to answer the question directly, we've seen a lot of companies come and go into the space, right? A lot of, especially back in 21, when things were really, really hot, a lot of companies that came in, tried their luck. Some made a lot of money, others, maybe just made a little bit a fool of themselves in the overall market. But there was a definite wave towards trying new things out, and really a bucket of companies and projects that knew this was going to be a little bit more longer term. It wasn't just a flash in the pan. It was really trying to come in and understand, not just the technological unlocks, but what will be required to build something lasting and long term. And we're starting to see that come to fruition. But it has been, a little bit challenging as budgets have, gotten cut. Obviously, there's a lot of price reflexivity in the crypto market with the price of, the spot tokens. And so it's been kind of like a rebirth. We're definitely seeing a lot of those companies come back and really think, okay, how do we build something? Now the technology is a little bit better. Now there's a little bit more adoption for the long term.
A lot of it has kind of sat within the marketing departments of a lot of these firms. Are you seeing that move into other categories and segments, or is it still sort of just a way to conduct a form of innovation theater?
No, I think it's been really interesting to see which teams at the corporate level and enterprise level are getting engaged. So yeah, marketing teams have been one of the big drivers, but we're definitely seeing engineering and product and innovation teams jump in once they understand kind of like what can be built. It's funny because every single big company has one or two champions who are, Web3 degens almost at heart. And we help them make that internal sale where it's, you're not just going to mint a spinning logo and hope for the best on a primary sale. But what you're really building here is, generating tokens, creating tokens as way of delivering Web3 products and services, kind of like, distribution platforms and what that entails for your brand equity, and the future of customer engagement.
Well said. Zed, we have you representing the NFT sort of corner of the market over at Magic Eden. This is obviously a technology that holds a lot of promise. People expect big things out of the NFT X gaming corner segment, but at the end of the day, thus far, it's really just a transactional business of JPEGs being bought and hopefully flipped for higher prices. But you're seeing a transition away from that. Can you walk us through that transition?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for having us. This call started off great because you promised us a fresh haircut yesterday, and you
I didn't
delivered.
get
So
one. No, I didn't get one.
it just looks neater. It looks
I just
neater.
brushed my hair.
What a world of difference that makes, Frank. So it's nice to see everyone. Nice to meet everyone. For context, one of the co-founders of Magic Eden, we're an NFT marketplace that got started in 2021. We're the largest cross-chain NFT marketplace. So those who have used our products or are familiar with us would know us for the work we do on Solana, but also on Bitcoin. And we're launching our Ethereum marketplace in a few days. So very, very excited about that too. I think your question is a really, really pertinent one because we have seen a lot of evolution over the last couple of years. We kind of got started around the time when everything was just heating up in 2021. And you're right, like a lot of the activity was, especially what we saw on Solana as an example, was very, very high, high transaction, high throughput, lots of flips, lots of trading, all that kind of stuff. What are the really interesting trends that we're seeing? And I'll mention a couple on the user side, but also a couple on the creator side, going back to the question you were asking earlier to Sergio, because I think there's some really interesting developments on that side too. On the user side, one of the things that we're noticing quite a lot, and this has been a trend, I would say, over the last 12 months, is that a lot of users are now coming into the market, not only just for some of the behaviors that we've seen in the past, but we're seeing a lot more robust collecting behaviors, whether that's coming in to mint a kind of NFT because they're following a creator and they're following them over a long period of time, right? And that's kind of like some ongoing content that keeps coming out, or it's just collecting for the sake of collecting. And the best example here, I think, is some of the developments we've been seeing in the art space, and we're seeing this also in the Bitcoin space because that's where a lot of the they call these inscriptions because they're inscribed directly onto the chain, but that has provided a lot of impetus for really interesting ways for users to collect in ways that hasn't been possible before. So that's one behavior we're seeing quite a lot on the user side. On the creator side, I think it's pretty interesting too, because one of the things that we have noticed over the last 18 months as we've gone through from this bull to bear cycle, and we're hopefully coming out of that now, at least by our numbers, we're seeing a lot of difference over the last 2-3 months, is creators that manage to last the distance and go through this period, they've all been carving out really interesting niches, right? And some examples here might be, if you look at, I'll just take 3 of the original sort of Ethereum NFT creators back in 2021. It's Yuga Labs. They're now doing a whole bunch of things around gaming events. They announced like a clubhouse in Miami. They're doing, obviously still building their other side metaverse. Azuki is building out their anime ecosystem. And then Pudgy Penguins are building toys, right? They have their second set of products released into Walmart again, which is amazing to see. So all of these gives us a lot of high conviction around where this market is going. And through the bear where things were very quiet, people were wondering, like, where does this actually go? It's obviously very difficult to answer the 10-year view, but we're seeing extremely positive shoots coming out of 2023.
A lot of these crypto native firms have quite a war chest that they maybe ascertained during the previous bull cycle to keep growing and to move forward with some of these initiatives. But what does it look like from the more traditional side of the market? We've seen headlines of Starbucks doing stuff with Polygon. We've seen the word phygital was pretty hot about a year ago. When you think about corporates and Zed and Sergio, maybe you can weigh in on this. Are this sort of intersection of crypto and the real world or the physical world, is that progressing? Are we seeing companies moving forward with initiatives in that realm? or is it
Yeah.
really on the crypto native side?
No, the answer is yes. And some of our clients, for example, Flipkart, they're the largest retailer in India, and obviously India has the largest English-speaking population in the world. They use Fireblocks for their Fire Drops loyalty program, along with other partners. We have Heineken, who did a loyalty program at the Formula One Grand Prix in Singapore, also using Fireblocks technology. We have, even though it's in the art space, but it's a traditional brand with a big impact, the MoMA, collecting a couple of pieces and working on some new initiatives. And so we continue to see those types of brands coming to the space. And really, again, the technology wasn't there at the time, I think back in 21, to make a good case for lasting projects between the cost of just transacting on Ether mainnet, and then not really having, the ability to have robust non-custodial wallets that could protect your end client against, phishing and the like. Those things are being built out. We're building a lot of that technology. And then folks like Magic Eating building, a marketplace that can help creators really, protect their royalties and make sure they can build lasting businesses. So the other day, people forget, these are businesses, both the Web2 traditional corporates and the Web3 ones, right? Like there has to be revenue, it has to be sustainable. And so I think the tech wasn't there, but the drive was. And so now that we have both, you'll continue to see many more announcements coming out of the more traditional brands as we move into the second quarter of the year.
Yeah,
Scott,
I'll give one.
Oh,
Sorry,
sorry.
I was going to give one example as well, because, and this may be a surprising example to many. We did an activation a few months ago with Asprey and Bugatti. So Asprey being, the really fine jewelry maker in the UK. They make a lot of the royal families jewelry, and then Bugatti, obviously the high-end luxury car maker. And you might be wondering why they are even interested in NFTs. And it's because the customers that they serve, ultimately, they are really into collecting extremely fine physical pieces. It's exactly the same kind of behaviors, right? So what we ended up doing was we actually sold alongside them NFTs that represented the possibility to claim a physical. It was like an egg, but it was like a beautifully crafted, diamond encrusted, all this kind of stuff. Imagine Asprey. I won't do it justice because I'm not the guy collecting these. But we thought that was really amazing because that taps into the existing, I guess, base of collectors that already is already, they're already exhibiting this behavior, right? But we're bringing a lot of these items on chain, and then that gap between physical and digital is just getting smaller and smaller.
It's getting bridged. Scott, maybe when we were chatting yesterday, we brought up, we all discussed the improvements that have been made on the technology, and I asked you the question of, helium has gotten a lot of attention over the last quarter or 2 quarters, we can say, but it wasn't necessarily apparent to me exactly what had changed. But I think the technological consumer-based improvements that you highlighted almost echo this broader shift that SILVA was or SERGIO was alluding to.
Yeah, I think that, and by the way, also Mike, thanks Frank for hosting this, as well as the blog and Fireblocks for supporting these conversations. I think they're really important for us to continue to, push the narrative around kind of just the value that blockchain is creating across industries globally. As far as helium, so launched back in 2019, I think one of the things that really unlocked helium in the early days, at least from a supply side, so building out wireless coverage globally, was this idea of this consumer-friendly product-first approach. So if you think in 2019, mining Bitcoin and Ethereum was hard. It might be a little bit technically cumbersome for folks that might not be able to dive deep on a technical side. But the idea that you could buy a helium hotspot and something that looked like a beautiful piece of hardware with a very intuitive app experience really unlocked growth from a supply side for helium. And I think what we're seeing is just that return to that, especially with Helium Mobile specifically. You're talking about something that is intuitive, consumer facing, really approachable. Anybody can sign up for this. You know, your parents can go and have what's effectively a crypto native cell phone plan, and they're not going to be calling you every day for technical support because it's abstracting away some of those complexities. I think that's really what's important in terms of the continued adoption. How do we grow the pie? Any of us who are already in the space, we're already bought in, and we already will jump through hoops to figure out how do we make something work, or how can we test a new product. But to continue to expanding this and bringing blockchain to the next billion users, it needs to be able to appeal to mass market. And I think that the same principles that were successful in the early days of making mining approachable and consumer friendly, it's happening very much in the demand side for Helium, and Helium Mobile is unlocking that for the cellular side of the network. But we're also still seeing that very much with the IoT side of the network, where a number of service providers for IoT solutions are bringing very approachable, easy to use applications to the network. And then what's been really fantastic is the collaboration with other crypto native projects, where, if you look at Hivemapper as an example, Hivemapper is something, again, like very consumer friendly, easy to use piece of hardware that's still using Helium for location verification. So Helium might sit in the back end of that, but again, it's that like ease of use that you're bringing to kind of consumer and more market appeal.
Sergio, how are some of these complexities from your seat being abstracted away?
Yeah, so I think first and foremost, right, if you look at the life of the industry, is call it 10 years, 12 years. But really Web3 as a consumer technology is no more than 3 or 4 years. So I think a lot of the foundation that had to be set first has now been set. And so now we're looking at actual consumer use cases and what kind of both software and hardware are necessary in order to deliver those, right? And so obviously the PMF for crypto seems to be financial speculation and that's great. But really when it comes to like Web3 and consumer, it's more about taking a step back and thinking, okay, what needs to be built to deliver the next iteration of this technology. And for example, at Fireblocks, we focused on building non-custodial wallets. So these are end user wallets that corporates, brands, exchanges can issue to their clients. They use our MPC technology for securing the private key, but the actual provider of the wallet has no custody of those assets. And so that unlocks two things. First and foremost, given the regulatory environment, not just here in the States, but across the world, right? You're not being the custodian of your assets clients, and that's obviously just a huge lift. But the second piece too is that using the technology that we've developed, and again, the foundation that we set over the first half of the life of the company, understanding the security risks when operating in Web3 and what that might look like. So we're able to ring fence those consumer wallets to just certain dApps, certain smart contracts, so that the clients can feel secure and safe transacting within the space without them also losing custody of the assets. So it's, I think, it's looking at, okay, what has been built, where are we going? Can we provide ring fence non-custodial solutions? Yes, we can. Okay, let's build the tooling for that. And obviously listening to the brands, listening to the corporates, and also the crypto native projects, because they, crypto native really drives the innovation. And I think Web2 and traditional companies will be the ones that will drive that broader adoption. But it's those Web3 companies that are like, okay, we're going to build this, help us get there. And honestly, we're really, really happy that we have both, because one helps us future-proof our offering and our products, and the other one helps us really think about scaling and get just 100 million users on not just our platform, but Web3, whatever that might look like.
We've highlighted basically 3 impediments, right? Over the past 20 minutes or so. The first of which being maybe this UX, UI, user complexity issue or impediment. There's this regulatory overhang around what tokens are and how they're used. And then the third of which being the security issue. I would maybe add a fourth, which is just the sort of scale of the space and the disparate blockchains that exist. I would maybe add that with the first component. I'm curious how a corporate or just any sort of firm trying to get into the space might figure out how to get started with the I mean, not just the number of layer ones out there, but the layer twos as well. I mean, this is something that you kind of personally had to grapple with at Magic Eden, Zed, is figuring out which chains to be on. And I'm sure it's something that is even more daunting for a Web2 firm. To what extent, I guess, to put a finer point on it, is just the cities of blockchains maybe an impediment to adoption?
Yeah, it's a really interesting point. I mean, so our big thesis since we started the company, it's originally one of the reasons we even went to build things on Solana in the first place. For background, I was always a quote unquote Ethereum guy back in the day, because I grew up in crypto, so to speak. I was a second employee at DYDX. So a lot of the things that I learned and got to know about crypto was all in the Ethereum ecosystem. But we had this thesis of the company that different use cases and different things would emerge, asset types, content, whatever it is, would emerge differently depending on the properties of the chain. And that's some of the nuance that we have seen play out over the last couple of years. In some ways, things have gotten a lot easier. And I'll give you some examples of why that is. In other ways, it also has become a lot more complex because now there's some proliferation of many layer twos, many more L1s, so on and so forth, right? There's just many more chains than there were a few years ago. But the one thing I will call out that is a lot simpler now is that, previously to use or buy NFTs in a particular ecosystem, say on Ethereum, you needed to go to a different marketplace, use a different wallet, and buy a different currency just to be able to access that content. Compared to today, that's quite different. And there's been leaps and bounds made from a UX perspective to try and simplify all of that. I'll give you one example. Now in Magic Eden, you can use one single wallet, which is the Magic Eden wallet, which is a cross-chain wallet, and you can access NFTs from Bitcoin, Solana, Ethereum, and Polygon, all in the one interface. And it was probably technically possible 3 or 4 years ago, but it was just kind of too hard to do, right? But now look, we're very much in that reality. And adding the long tail incremental many more chains, if they do have interesting content, that's something that then we can take on with potentially the help of someone like Fireblocks down the line, right? Like there's a ton of ways that we can utilize infrastructure like that. So that's some of the improvements. So I would say that
right off the bat.
What's that?
You got a client right off the bat.
Absolutely. That's what these are for, right?
I think so.
That's exciting. Well, yeah, we have a relationship, corporate relationship.
So there's definitely a lot of improvements we're seeing. And so for corporates, enterprises thinking about entering the space, I think the biggest, 2 things that I would look for, what is the right partner to help you do that, right? Because you're never going to cover every single inch of the ecosystem. It's just not possible. We are also not going to do that. It's just not really that possible. But if you work with the right partners in the space who can help direct you, guide you to where is the activity, where is the infrastructure the best, how do you kind of put these pieces together, that's, I think, the best way to approach this. And we will see more and more of these sort of low-level like infrastructure protocols emerge. That's just the nature of innovation. But I think the dominant ecosystems right now is still Bitcoin, Ethereum, Solana, and then maybe a couple that will emerge in this cycle.
I guess maybe focusing in on, I guess this is a mix of UX and just the idea of tokens, right? Which might be an impediment to everyday people wanting to use a crypto native service. With Saga, which is obviously was developed by Solana, you can sort of set up Helium as your sort of wireless provider. But going through the process of it isn't that much dissimilar from just signing up for AT&T or T-Mobile or whatever have you. And I'm pretty sure you also leverage some of T-Mobile's network. Obviously, if you want to set up Saga, you can have the wallet there, but you don't really need a wallet to use Helium. In fact, I think the most difficult part of me setting up my Saga phone was figuring out how to get the chip inside the phone. But that's more of a me issue than anything else. The SIM card, that is. So how important is that, right? For these things to be used and adopted, for it to be not too dissimilar from existing interfaces?
Yeah, I mean, so Helium Mobile is, again, it's really just like setting up almost any other type of cell phone plan, in the sense that there's not particular phones. It works best with eSIM phones, but again, at this point, for most of the, iPhones, most of the newer Android phones, these things all come baked with eSIM, so it's legitimately a very quick and easy sign up process. You're activating, you're tying, and I don't want to get too jargony, but the same characters that you associate with a cell phone plan, that's just basically being associated with Helium Mobile as a carrier. So as far as an onboarding process, incredibly intuitive and simple. I think for something like Saga, obviously we've got really close ties to the Solana ecosystem since we moved off our own layer one to having the Helium network around Solana, which, speaking of impediments, I can certainly talk about how, running your own blockchain while trying to kind of build a wireless network are two things I advise against. But that's, kind of a longer story maybe for another panel. But yeah, with respect to how important it is for these things to be naturally compatible with existing hardware, obviously critical. So in the extent that it's a pretty seamless user experience, if you're on an iPhone or an Android, it really it doesn't matter all that much. Yeah, with Saga, I think you kind of have to get the physical SIM card sent to you, but again, for crypto native folks jumping through an extra hoop, I don't think that's terribly uncommon these days.
I was just very confused. But in terms of tokens, right? That's another component, right? If you don't want to sort of be involved with tokens, touching them, holding them, it's important that you don't.
Yeah, I think
product.
Yeah, I think for a lot of these things, again, there are folks who are certainly going to prioritize self-custody, but for something like a phone carrier, again, like Helium Mobile is a product of Nova Labs, and again, they're thinking about this very much from a product first principles here of, people who go and sign up for a cell phone plan, they're not going to want to be thinking about private keys and seed phrases and adding that extra kind of blockchain native complexity to a mass market consumer onboarding process. I think it's the right thing to kind of abstract and kind of remove that. So the idea that is effectively all done directly through the app in kind of a simpler fashion, you're not thinking about those things. Or again, like a Helium Mobile user wouldn't be thinking about that. Even the same thing is true as if you're operating a Helium hotspot and you're providing wireless coverage. Again, that all sits within Helium app, but being part of the Solana ecosystem, we have that composability of if you want to be able to move tokens around to any other Solana wallet, you're able to do that. But again, it depends on the audience of, do you want to have more hands-on, more functionality? You can do that. But for some of these products, it makes sense that those things are abstracted away. You don't have to think about key management and seed phrases. And I think that's the right way to do it for that type of large scale adoption.
Said, how do you make that work in the NFT gaming segment?
Yeah, it's interesting. The NFT gaming segment has been one of those that there's been a lot of stops and starts almost over the last 3-4 years. Lots of people excited about it, starting sort of 2020 and into 2021 and 22. And the reality is these games just take quite a little bit of time to build. But what we're seeing, at least in the last 12 months or so, is that some of the Web3 native game makers have been getting to market, which has been amazing. And the really promising part of how they're doing this is that it's no longer sort of this maximalist approach around like it has to be this way or that way. And there's a lot of experimentation around maybe some of this can be off-chain, and you leverage some of the what's amazing and easy and simple about what can be done off-chain versus some properties that could be done on-chain, and really leverage and utilize those mechanisms. It doesn't need to be one or the other. And we're starting to see that emerge as kind of like a nice trend, right? It's like you can maybe mint gaming items off chain initially, and then as users get more and more down the funnel and start to get really interested in some of the mechanics, they can then take those items and then move them onto an NFT marketplace like Magic Eden. So we did one of these recently with a game called Honeyland, where users can kind of just play, they can do whatever they want. If and when they want to then bring items out, trade them in an on-chain way, because there might be some value tied to these items now, and there's some history and some provenance with those items, then they can go and do that. So that experimentation optionality is something we've been really excited about, but it's still super, super early days. And I would say there's no one canonical approach yet, because some of the breakouts that we saw in the last cycle, they were very much breakouts in small sort of niche categories, right? And that's okay. That's sort of a starting point. We're really excited to continue to work with a lot of the guys that are pushing the boundaries here. So we announced sort of a creator alliance about a week ago, 1 to 2 weeks ago, which included some of the biggest names in Web3 gaming, including Zynga, who's working on Sugartown, Wildcard. There's a bunch of teams here that we're really, really excited about. And we'll see how the evolution goes. But these things, usually take a number of years, but the ecosystem continues to be very exciting.
Any thoughts there, Sergio?
Yeah, and going back to your question about what is it like now, there's all these L1s and all these things and how brands go around it. I think even Seth mentioned it, now there's optionality, which is not something that you had in the past, right? And it just continues to point to the space maturing and the offering maturing as to you're not bound to doing stuff on mainnet where an airdrop is going to cost you $10,000, or not bound to certain wallets. Now you can do an L2. Now you can do different things and really play with account abstraction, all these different tools that are being built. And so it's still again trying to figure things out, but I think it's very positive that there's a bigger playing field. And I think that's how you really get to that point where, those games, projects, loyalty programs, whatever it might be, will find their footing and really have the opportunity to take off. And I think Helium is one of those great examples where, big decision to move away from their own chain and really kind of like leverage Solana. And I think, we'll continue to see things like that, even at a smaller scale, but it's really taking advantage of the developments and making sure we continue to push forward.
To what extent are technical issues something that might serve as an impediment with maybe something like Helium? You have not recently, but historically, outages. There's obviously across the space breaches and issues with bridging. How do we overcome that?
Is that for me or for Scott?
Yeah.
Take it, Scott.
Oh, sure. I guess on some of these things, I don't know about kind of broader ecosystem, but for us, like one of the main reasons for us to migrate off of our own L1, if you go back, the hotspots originally were running the entire copy of the blockchain on each individual hotspot. So, somebody is sitting on a consumer ISP connection, they're in the consensus group, and their home internet gets knocked out. All of a sudden our chain's halted. So again, for us to be thinking about, more robust, effectively, Solana as like the enterprise grade solution rather than us running our own L1. That's just a decision that, every type of project needs to confront, of whether it's, general purpose L1 versus kind of maybe application specific. We'll probably have moved on from that type of impediment. But again, I think it's part of like the maturation of the space overall of, what is kind of your area of focus. And, for us, it's building wireless networks. But Sergio, I know you were going to jump in there. You might have a more macro perspective on some of this as well.
I was actually going to plug a little Fireblocks and what we do, which is really, keep our ear to the ground and listen to what our clients, are looking to build, where they're building, what's, on the pipeline. We have 1,800 institutional clients all over the world. We have offices, in 4 of the 5 continents. And so what we do is, if there's a big project or a blockchain that's really, in demand, we go and we build our infrastructure on that so that we can provide that to the clients. And we have close to 50 blockchains that we currently support and just a plethora of tooling again, to make sure that technological aspect is not an impediment to the creatives, the commercial, whatever it might be that our clients want to offer. We make sure that we take care of that so that they can do their job and build their business on top of that. And so I think in the aggregate, when you combine stuff like us and then different providers of other technology, you start becoming a more mature industry where you might not need 22 engineers to launch something. All you need is like a really good team of people, and then you can take from different providers and really present an offering to the market that might be more efficient. And I think that's what's going to be the breakthrough for this cycle.
Zed, any thoughts?
No, I think that all that makes sense. I actually agree with all those takes. The only other thought that comes to mind for me is start with the particular use case that you have in mind, right? Because ultimately the technology and how all the pipes plug together, that all can be worked out. We're definitely at that point in the industry now where it's like, you're gonna find a bunch of people that can help with that, whether it's in pure infra providers, as a service providers, marketplaces, all this kind of stuff. It's all available. But I'll give you some concrete examples of what I mean. If you're going to build a loyalty program, you're probably not going to build that on using Bitcoin or using ordinals, right? Bitcoin NFTs, because some of the things that you may value or that people value with something like Bitcoin NFTs is that it's sort of the highly, censorship resistant nature of Bitcoin as a network. But not everyone cares about that. And that's not important for a lot of use cases. So our perspective is that, start with what you're trying to do. If you're trying to build a loyalty program, maybe you might use a chain that is just a lot more performant, is cheaper, easier for users to spin up a wallet, transactions are faster, it feels more like what people are used to typically. But if you're creating some really high value assets like this, diamond encrusted egg thing that Asprey was doing, that kind of makes sense maybe on ordinals, because you don't expect that to trade very often. It's sort of a collector's item that you want to hold. And you will go through hoops to get that and hold that and custody that in some way, because it's highly valuable. It's not meant to be really flipped or played with, right? It's just something that you just hang on to. So many options, which is the big takeaway. Many options, many folks who can help with it. That's a big difference now, I think, compared to say, 2-3 years ago.
If I could add to that, Frank, because you asked earlier, is it the marketing teams at these big conglomerates? And actually what we're seeing a lot of recently is, some of the biggest corporations in the world are actually building internal Web3 capabilities teams to do precisely what Zed just said, which was, if there's an internal project within one of their brands, right? Like making sure that they can educate that brand and see, okay, we should deploy it on this chain, or we should involve this partner or this partner. We're currently working with a number of, real large public companies, conglomerates that have a portfolio of brands, who instead of trying to go at it alone, what they're doing is building in-house Web3 capabilities and then helping service those individual brands directly from, call it like the top corporate level, which is a big difference from 21, where those brands will individually hire like a marketing agency and then do some sort of like quick marketing style program. It's been a huge shift, and again, I think it's because there's so much more technology now that it really it makes sense for those big corporates to ingest it, understand it, and service their internal brands better that way.
And how are they servicing these brands? Like what type of projects are being built?
So for example, we have a client that has a really broad portfolio of different products and services here in the States, right? And so one of the things they have is a broadcasting company. And they're looking at, how can they provide kind of like loyalty programs for the different, or just kind of like affinity programs for the different shows. Versus, and we're on their NDA, so I don't want to give too much of the identity of the brand, but they have, some consumer-facing products. And how could they integrate tokenization to track those purchases and create a rewards program on that? So obviously, it's two different things, Where if you had, you know, both internal brands kind of like build Web3 teams, it will not be the best use of the resources of the top company, because now you need to hire, you know, twice the engineers, get twice the understanding. So instead, what they're doing is coming to providers like Fireblocks, and I'm sure Magic Eating as well, who's helping them understand, first of all, you know, these are the different providers that you might need, but you can also internalize that and have like a Web3 lab within the corporate that can then help with different deployments, because they have a much better understanding, much wider outlook on the whole industry. And yeah, again, it's been recent, but I would say over the last 2 quarters, it's a shift that we're starting to notice. And honestly, it's very welcome, because, you know, while the marketing agencies do a really good job at getting, you know, eyeballs, I think you definitely need, you know, internal capabilities within those big brands to understand that if you're putting, you know, your branding, your logo on chain, that's your IP, right? Like that's on chain brand equity. That if, for example, that smart contract gets you know, hacked, and somebody goes and mints 1 million of your brand, you know, whatever that might be, your eggs or, you know, cars, then that's going to really affect, you know, the value of that IP. And so having that in-house understanding and not just kind of like offloading it to like a third party is something that is now being appreciated, and we're definitely seeing it play out.
Scott, how do you envision traditional telecoms companies breaking into sort of Web3 mobile?
Yeah, so I mean, great news that that's already started. So Telefonica is leveraging the Helium network to expand its 5G footprint in Mexico. So, you know, the idea that, again, the ability to lean into the existing model, community-built wireless, you know, it's something that I think a lot of them are already confronting right now. So for, you know, this is more of a wireless conversation, but, you know, 5G requires a lot more density than 4G cell networks. So if you're thinking about, you know, the cost of putting up those towers, maintaining them, all the just the capex and the opex that goes into that, and to make sure you're providing that same level of quality of service. You know, telcos have to think about how they're going to confront that on a regular basis. It's always an ROI question of, you know, certainly focusing on dense urban environments, but when you start to think about rural, you start to think about the areas you know, in between and travel, how they think about, you know, where it makes sense to lean into a wireless network. It's just going to be a cost question, and it makes sense in this case. We always kind of envisioned that, you know, the future of telco is going to have some combination of carrier-owned wireless, or again, like those key, very dense, where, you know, the bulk of their subscribers live. But then when you think about kind of those outliers, some of the more edge case, especially in rural communities where community wireless is going to make so much sense, not just from a cost perspective, but, you know, the agency that this gives to communities, to commercial organizations where they're clamoring for that type of coverage, whether it's just for personal cell phone use, or do they need that for something that's a more robust commercial or industrial application, to wait for those telcos or to have to kind of pay some very significant fee. You know, those stories of somebody who's out in a rural area, you want Verizon or AT&T to come provide that coverage. It's, you know, okay, 50 grand and we'll kind of like, you know, kind of lay the fiber out there and put up a tower. As opposed to saying, I'm going to go buy a hotspot for a few $100s, and then the telcos are free to roam into that. And again, those roaming fees actually pay out to the network, Helium network specifically, and hotspot owners. So, you know, it makes sense from a cost perspective. It makes sense from kind of an agency perspective for people to stand up their own coverage. And obviously having the validation of Telefonica, you know, an incredibly large global brand, on top of Helium Mobile already working with T-Mobile for US offload. You know, those are two very, very big brands who effectively said, we endorse, and this is the right type of model to continue growing wireless coverage globally. So we're super excited about it. You know, we've had conversations come into Helium Foundation. I know Nova Labs is having some of their own chats, but people want to know, how do we leverage this? How do we use it? So the inspiration is there, and now it's just a matter of how we kind of work through some of the details. But I think we're just going to continue to see growth in this area.
So let's take out our crystal balls and put them in front of us, and we'll start with Zed. What are you anticipating? What trends do you think will shape Web3 over the next 6 months?
Yeah, there's a few things. So the first thing I would say is that this proliferation of activity, and I guess we think about it as content that comes on chain, is going to dramatically escalate and accelerate over the next couple of years. And the reason I say that is because if you just look at the pattern of what has happened previously, that leads to some amount of proliferation or innovation spikes, it's that certain chain ecosystems just emerge, right? And there hasn't been that many previously, because if you think about what 2018 and 19 looked like, it was basically only Ethereum. And then only in 2020, 21 did Solana emerge as sort of the next, big competitor on the layer one space. But now there's, dozens more, probably even more than that are starting to emerge, have emerged. So we expect to see a massive acceleration of cross-chain content, or even just generally content and intangibles that will move on chain. We are really, really excited for that. And that's one of the reasons that we made the leap very early in probably the absolute bottom of the bear market early last year to support Bitcoin as an NFT ecosystem, because we felt like it had very natural properties that would then lead to pretty exciting collecting behavior. And that market, in a very, very bear market, there's been over $2 billion worth of value exchanged on Bitcoin alone, for NFTs alone, in this 12-month period where the market has been very quiet. Just to give you some sense of scale of where we expect this to go when you have dozens and dozens more chains that are already coming to the market or will be in the next 12 months, right? So that's theme number one. Theme number two that we're really excited about is the extent to which creators will start experimenting in more niches. And I say creators, but I really mean, we can think about Web3 native creators, like the ones I mentioned earlier on this, or it's some of the more enterprise corporate folks, guys like Nike, who are still in the space after all this time, continuing to experiment with Artifact and many other things, and Starbucks loyalty, things like that. We expect much, much more of that proliferation over the coming couple of years. And the nature of NFTs as assets will also look pretty different. So we are already seeing sort of experimentation around NFTs and how they can mimic or interplay with fungible tokens. That's one thing we've seen recently. We've seen it play out as access towards something. We see it play out as pure collector items. We see it play out as gaming items. All these trends that we thought would emerge in 21 in a more fulsome kind of way are starting to hit the market in a very big way now. So we, as a marketplace, then, what does that mean for people like ourselves and others who are thinking about it? We are positioning ourselves to effectively serve this cross-chain need, because that's where the activity is going to be. It's impossible to say like it's going to be here or there necessarily, but you got to be able to support that entire spectrum. And that's one of the big priorities we have as a company, and something that if you're, as a company, enterprise, etc., thinking about doing something in Web3, there couldn't be a better time given the amount of proliferation that we expect in the near term.
It'd be a better time. That's what we like to hear. Sergio?
Yeah, so, for me, it's two things. The second one, what I was going to mention, I'm going to put it first because it really builds on what Zed just said, which is, I would call it validation. Validation in that we will see incorporation of Web3 programs, products, and services into more traditional, spaces. And it's something that, a lot of the brands that, like Nike and Adidas and so many others that have been in the space that chose to remain in the space, I think they've had the time now to really mature their offering, and we'll see those really come to fruition, as well as other brands that have been keeping an eye that are looking at crypto, blockchain, Web3, and saying, well, this didn't go away. It's here to stay, and we now finally understand kind of like the power of digital asset ownership, and the fact that it can help us build loyalty, revenue, and so on. So I would call the first thing, validation, as more established players come into the space, start doing more things. The second thing, and something that I'm extremely excited about, is kind of like the transformation of wallets from being access layers to product launchpads or product platforms, because we now have such advanced wallet technology that you can take what's known as a wallet, which is really a combination of public-private keys and then your on-chain kind of like storage, and really use them to create products and services that take full advantage of the technology, of the new L2s, of the creativity of creators. And I think we'll start to see some of that Web3 creativity and unlocks be integrated into more traditional Web2 offerings, social media, commerce, payments, and so on. So, a lot of people say, well, let's, turn Web2 into Web3. I think that this transformation in wallet technology will help us to bolt on or integrate the best things of Web3 into Web2 and really kind of like elevate that offering. And I'm extremely excited because we're doing a lot of work here at Fireblocks, and also just seeing so many people building in that direction that it just, as a consumer, I love trading JPEGs and I love trading coins and all that stuff, but I really want to be able to really truly take advantage of digital asset ownership.
We love the coins. We certainly do. Scott, what are you excited for?
Yeah, so I think that again, I'm going to carry on this theme of validation, and I almost look at this through the lens of the DPIN sector now. So again, more acronyms, but I think it was from Massar that coined it, the decentralized physical infrastructure network. So you've got storage networks like Filecoin and Arweave, wireless, us at Helium, compute things like Render. And to see, continued adoption from traditional or non-crypto native organizations. How many production teams are using Render right now? Just again, because the economics make more sense and more readily available compute power. And the same with Helium, where we're seeing this adoption from these, very large telcos. Not to mention, as much as there's a lot of momentum on the mobile network right now, our IoT network. To see these large projects that are being used for smart city solutions in municipalities. So you're talking about places that have long sales cycles and a lot of bureaucratic moving parts. To see that being used for flood detection, the fact that the United States Geological Survey, they're also actually using and testing the Helium network for flood management as well, and more of these large public sector organizations. Large industrial around supply chain. So again, there's this validation where not only is this kind of proving out that an incentivized community can coordinate physical work, but that the protocol revenue from each of these projects continues to validate that these business models are viable over the long term. So the fact that these networks continue to harden, that they're being used, and that they're sustainable, I think is just, again, showcasing not just, the story of the financial side of crypto, which I think really dominated the story for, the early years, to now seeing that kind of diversity of use, DPIN or for creator markets and art and royalties, and just continues to validate the space overall. So still very, very excited, super, optimistic for the future ahead. And that's why we all spend all of our time on it.
Chronically online, chronically engaged with crypto. Well, thank you guys so much for taking the time out of your schedules to conduct this conversation. I hope that it was fruitful for the audience, and that it will obviously be found online, so we'll have to share it. But appreciate you taking the time, and hopefully we'll talk to you all soon.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.